The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Tom Heil, head men's basketball coach at Baldwin-Wallace University, and you're listening to the Hoopheads Podcast.
Hey Hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the number one sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com, spelled A-R-Y-S-E, and use the code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off the future of performance. That's ARYSE.com with promo code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off.
Opportunities are up for grabs. And if guys work their tails off and beat a guy out, he would say it all the time, that's life. Sometimes that's what happens in life. I mean, there's a guy that produces better than another guy. He gets more opportunity. It's just what happens.
Dwayne Killings is entering his third season with the Marquette University men's basketball program, but his first as associate head coach after being promoted in March of 2020. During his tenure, the Golden Eagles have posted a pair of winning campaigns and an NCAA tournament appearance in 2019. He also helped assemble a consensus top 20 recruiting class in the year 2020. Killings arrived on campus after spending 2 seasons at the University of Connecticut as an assistant coach, which followed a 5-year stint in the same position at Temple University. Dwayne owns a wealth of basketball experience at every level, ranging from high school and AAU to the National Basketball Association. After graduating from Hampton University in 2003 with a degree in sports management, his first job was as a special assistant with the NBA's Charlotte Bobcats, where he served as video coordinator and helped with player development. After 3 years in Charlotte, Killings became Temple's assistant director of men's basketball operations, a position he held for 3 seasons. Killings moved on to the NBA D-League, where his responsibilities included monitoring player development programs. From there, he accepted his first collegiate coaching position, joining the staff at Boston University for the 2010-2011 season. In 2011-2012, Killings returned to Temple as an assistant coach. Dwayne served on the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Ethics Coalition. The role of the coalition is to promote ethical conduct among NCAA Division I men's basketball coaches through education, leadership, and mentoring. On Wednesday, November 11th, we will be launching our Hoopheads Mentorship Program for coaches. We're excited to continue making an impact on the coaching profession, one coach at a time. Follow the Hoopheads Mentorship launch on Twitter, @HoopheadsPod. Make sure you check out our other basketball podcasts on the Hoopheads Pod Network, including Thrive with Trevor Huffman, Beyond the Ball, the CoachMaze.com podcast, Players Court, Bleachers and Boards, and our team-focused NBA podcasts, Cavaliers Central, Grizz and Grind, Nuck If You Buck, 305 Culture, Blazing the Path, and #Lakers. We're looking for more NBA podcasters interested in hosting their own show centered on a particular team. Shoot an email to info@hoopheadspod.com if you're interested in learning more and bringing your talent to our network. Get ready to take some notes as you listen to this episode with Dwayne Killings, men's basketball associate head coach at Marquette University. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to be able to welcome to the podcast the associate head coach at Marquette University, Dwayne Killings. Dwayne, welcome.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to being able to dig in to all the great things that you've been able to do in the game. Want to look back in time to when you were a kid. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into the game when you were younger. What made you fall in love with the game of basketball?
Yeah, younger, I grew up in a small town, Amherst, Massachusetts. My dad always, was bringing me to gyms and taking me to parks to go play, and I just loved it. I mean, I think what I loved most at that time in my life was just being around my dad. As I got a little older, at that point, there was a guy who just hit Amherst, Massachusetts. He had just gotten to UMass. His name was John Calipari. We know him all as Coach Cal now. And he had this small program at UMass and was starting to build it. And Bruiser Flint was the assistant coach. And that's where I started to really fall in love with the game. And my dad would bring me to practices over there. It was like kind of like the whole community embraced that program when it was building up. They played in a small gym called The Cage. And I was the ball boy. Coach Flint had this program called Mini Minute, and then you do, ball handling drills at halftime, and you have little workouts on Sundays. It was super cool. I thought I was on top of the world, in that point in my life. And then, over 6 years, Coach Cal took that program from, maybe 500 of your closest friends at a game, just kind of some workers that had nothing to do and some students that probably got lost walking into the Cage to the hottest ticket in college basketball. And when the Mullen Center got built, I was still the ball boy. I'd gotten a little bit older, but I was like, man, this is amazing. And I think along that way, as I got a little bit older, what I didn't realize is, I watched the guy build a program from scratch, and turn that thing into a business. From how merchandise is being sold to, watching how the camp business is being done to, watching how he built relationships. The guy would go, damn near door to door to meet people and try to get them to buy into what he was trying to build there and what that vision that he had. And he pushed it hard. And I loved every second of it as a kid. I can remember seeing him in the mall. He knew who I was. It was awesome. And I think I'd fallen in love with that idea of how basketball could galvanize a community. At that point, TV, games on TV, it wasn't necessarily as commonplace as it is today. So, sometimes games were on the radio. Everybody sat in front of their radio in their house and, listened to the UMass Penn State game in the A-10. It was crazy. But then as time went on, now you're talking about watching, UMass start the season against Arkansas or against North Carolina, one team's number one, the other team's number two. It was insane. Never thought a small town like that, basketball would take off, but that's where I really fell in love with it. Just the energy, the competition, watching people from all walks of life come together. And I'm forever thankful for my dad for, taking the time to give me access to that and probably him, thinking about it right now, working his tail off to, get access to the right relationships to get me into those places because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah, what was this connection?
Yeah, Amherst is a small town, really small. It is diverse, but, my dad worked at the university for 45 years as an accountant at the university. And, it's funny, like all the black people in Amherst know each other. So when Bruiser came to town, it's like, where do you go to barbershop? Where do I go get some food? So I think my dad gave Bruiser all the right answers. And then he said, hey, I got a son. Can I bring him around? And Bruiser was, super great. And over the years, he became my college coach. And, to this day, he's a close friend. He's like family to me. He's helped my kids. He met my wife when she was just my girlfriend. He's been, all through my life, as I've kind of navigated the decisions you got to make as a young man. And that's been awesome. But that's all credited to my dad, really taking the time to get to know people. But again, I think UMass at that time was so unique because, the whole community, both on the campus and in Amherst, were so connected because basketball brought them together. So everybody kind of knew everybody. So as long as you were a good person and you were out there to support the team, I mean, everybody was trying to bring you in, whether it was to camp or to a clinic or to a game. I mean, everybody kind of was in it together.
Yeah, that's cool. That community piece of it, I think, is something that you don't see everywhere today. And I'll always look back, and we've had a lot of conversations here with high school coaches about just that community feel of a high school program and how it used to be at least more commonplace that you would have the whole town, the whole community come out and support the team, and you'd have a big student section, and you'd have people who lived in the town but don't necessarily even have kids associated with the program. And I think that you don't see that everywhere the way you did 20 or 30 years ago. And it's cool that you were able to experience that on a college level. Obviously, it's one step above that. So when you were going through that experience and kind of getting that inside access, at that point, you're 10 years old or you're 12 years old or you're 13 years old, whatever. As you're going through that, are you thinking about the access that you have just as a kid and, hey, I'm a player and I'm getting better? Or were you starting to at some point think that maybe somewhere down the road that you wanted to coach and maybe you were starting to take note of some of the things that eventually helped you in your coaching career?
Yeah, I think that I as I got a little bit older, I used to go there and play against the guys, and I thought that was the way I was going to get better. You play against the college guys,
for
and
sure.
You make a three or you sneak in and get a layup. You're like, oh, I'm on my way. What I did realize pretty quickly, and I was humble enough to understand it, was I wasn't as talented as them. So I knew I wasn't necessarily going to be that guy, but I thought I could work hard enough and compete hard enough, in that atmosphere. And luckily I became a walk-on. But the other thing I always valued was, there was kids from all these different places, all these different cities and communities. And I started to realize, wow, I've been really fortunate. My parents have provided a really good life for me that some kids don't have. And they don't understand, some of these people, the donors that we put around them, the community people that we put around them, or sometimes they need to leave the UMass community and be in a community that looks like theirs, especially when you think about the Black kids from inner cities. And when I started to understand that, especially when I became a walk-on, I'd bring guys over to my house and, practices are hard. They start to get homesick. We had a kid, Willie Jenkins, from Memphis, Tennessee. Amherst and Memphis are two polar opposite places. But bringing them to my parents' house, who grew up in the South and knew how to make collard greens and yams and catfish, that helped him get through. You know what I mean? Because he felt more comfortable.
Yep.
And I started to realize, wow, as a leader and as a coach, you have to understand the value of relationships, because once you make somebody comfortable and you gain their trust and you gain their belief system and you understand how they believe in what you're trying to teach them, I think that's where you start to unlock an amazing potential in guys. And I think I learned that just from my experiences, watching Bruiser and Coach Cal just dig into guys and pull so much out of them. And then as a player, I started to understand, wow, if I can help these guys just adjust and get through this college process a little bit, I'm doing my own version of coaching, right now, as a walk-on. Because I knew my role wasn't to play. My role was to help prepare them. And then all of a sudden, I had Jeff Arnold and Bruiser Flint. I'm bringing their guys around my house and talking to them. Like, well, what are they saying? What's going on? What's up with this guy? And I really started to love, helping guys, grow from where they were as freshmen to becoming men, and becoming, like all of a sudden, I can remember this like yesterday. Winston Smith, I tore his ACL and was kind of going through it, and he and I hung out, and I'm doing my mental mind tricks on him as a walk-on, and I remember he played great one game, and I took so much credit for it. But I remember after the game, he was like, "Thank you." And I think what I learned was, he trusted me, he believed in me. I'm just talking to him, trying to build confidence in him, and that's part of coaching. I think, ball screen defense and plays and all that is definitely part of it. But you have to build people up. You have to help them understand and believe in themselves, so that way they can do all the things that we go crazy screaming at them and trying to instill in them. Because it's hard, man. And like you said, right now, social media, the world is so different. It's not what we all knew, right? Where everybody in the Amherst community goes to UMass game, or everybody in that high school community you mentioned goes and support the local high school team. There's just so much going on. And then when the kid does great, everybody celebrates it. When the kid doesn't do great, people kill him. And that's a lot to go through for a young kid. And our job is to, help them, go through the trials and tribulations of what it's like to be a college basketball player at this level, or be the same with the high school player.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about, let's jump right into this, because I think it's an interesting question that I think back to my time when I was playing, and I graduated from college in 92. So I did not deal with any of the social media or the pressures of the outside. Maybe I had like a couple people in my dorm ask me, hey man, how'd you play in this game? So I certainly didn't have thousands of people jumping on my Twitter to tell me that I stunk tonight. So how do you go about, when you build those relationships with kids, how do you go about helping them to navigate that social media piece of it that wasn't around when you and I were playing?
I mean, I think it's first helping them understand what it is. It's an amazing tool. I mean, I think you've seen it, through what's going on in society right now. You've seen all these, kids, college basketball players come out and speak out about what's going on in the world, or try to motivate people to go out and vote. Great stuff. But then there's another layer where it becomes noise. And I think, they're young men trying to figure out who they are. And, when they have the big moments and they make shots, that's great. And they're celebrated. But when they don't, that's a whole nother element. And I think our job as coaches, you got to pay attention to it, because sometimes you got to know what messages are being sent out about them, right? Because you got to know, what, that their head might be getting a little too big, or what, we got to build them back up, because they're getting torn apart right now. They're getting compared to, the last special guy that we had in our program, and maybe they're not having a great week playing, or what, on Twitter, they're really blowing up this matchup we got this week. I need to make sure that the game doesn't become, about the matchup, and right. One of our players gets lost within the game. And that's really important too. And I think you have to have a pulse of it all. And I think as a coach now, there's another layer you got to pay attention to. And I think there's a lot of information where in recruiting, for instance, you can learn about a kid. You can see how he's doing. Even we can't go out and recruit. You can watch guys play. And that's really, really good stuff. But once you get the guys in your program, now you got to protect them, and you got to help them understand, what's going on out there, what's being said, what's noise, what's not. And again, also for them to understand, hey, you have a brand to protect too. So what you put out there about yourself and how you're being received, that's everything. Because once you put it out there, it's out there forever. And that's something our guys have to be really cognizant of, because we have a partnership with a company called Influencer now that kind of helps manage social media accounts with the idea of name, image, and likeness coming up. But we also go through our guys' accounts and see, have they ever put anything negative about themselves? Because there's a chance, hey, I hope all of our guys make it to the NBA. Well, the ones that do have opportunities to, they could lose sponsorship opportunities for something that they tweeted out when they were 19 years old.
For sure.
Why would we want to make that mistake if we can control it?
So what does that look like on a day-to-day basis in terms of when you're having these conversations with the guys that are part of your program? Is that being done where you have like a formal sit down and a team meeting where you're kind of going through, hey, this is what we have to be thinking about? Is that a daily conversation that you're having on a one-to-one basis as you're walking to the practice floor? What does it look like in terms of mentoring them through some of those social aspects of what goes on off the floor with your players?
Yeah, I think our job as assistants and what we try to do, here is monitor it to the best of our ability. I mean, we don't have time necessarily to scroll through every minute of the day.
For
but
sure.
You got to kind of know, what they're putting out there. And I think sometimes kids give you clues about what they're going through. Sometimes, they put up rap lyrics, they put up, a hashtag. I mean, it's very telling about that moment in their life. I think we have to pay attention to that. And also sometimes when they put up the negative stuff, we'll take 10 minutes out of our film sessions and say, hey, this guy posted this message. Here's why this is not okay. And here's how this is going to be reflected by people. And here's why this is not, this is why this is below the line, if you will, or why this is not to the standard of Marquette basketball. because it doesn't necessarily represent everything that's represented amongst our community. And I think our guys are very receptive of it, because sometimes they hit send and don't even think about it. It's just a mindless thing. And that's really, really important because at a place like this where you talk about, Marquette, it's got 17,000 fans a game. They're just hungry to get to know our guys. So, our new freshmen, the transfer that comes in our program, when they put stuff out there about themselves, our people, our fans are starting to learn about their guys, and they build their own idea of who they are. So it's important that we can control that message to the best of our ability and not lose who we are and not lose our freedom, because we want our kids to be kids and enjoy this moment of time in their life.
Yeah, to be able to make your own decisions. And I think just like you think about it from a parenting standpoint, you want your kids, you want to guide them and sort of give them an idea of where they should be going. And yet at the same time, you want them to be able to make their own decisions and have some freedom and learn, because eventually at some point they're going to be out of your program and have to navigate the real world or navigate professional basketball or navigate whatever they end up, doing after the fact. Let's work backwards to back when you were wrapping up your playing career and you start thinking about, did you always know then that you wanted to get into college coaching? Is that kind of where your mindset was? I know when you first got done with school, you ended up going to the Charlotte Bobcats in the NBA. So talk to me a little bit about kind of what your career goals were when you started out in the coaching profession.
So when I had my internship with the Charlotte Bobcats, I thought I was on top of the world. I mean, I was 21, 22 years old. I was making about 20 grand. I worked part-time at Joseph A. Bank selling suits at night a couple of days a week just to make my ends meet. And I'm sure you're asking, well, why do you think you're on top of the world? Because that doesn't sound like it. But I was, I was in the video room at 21, 22 years old. And at night, you're hanging out with Emeka Okafor and Sean May. And they became friends. In the summertime, travel around with these guys. I was going to, Vegas and New York and Miami. It was awesome. And I thought that was, just how life would be. Luckily, I had a group of individuals at the Bobcats, Carl Hicks, J.B. Bickerstaff, Bernie Bickerstaff, Frank Ross, and Kenny Williamson, who really took me under their wing and helped groom me and also understand opportunities. Those guys, Carl Hicks, Ed Tapscott, I worked with Fran Dunphy at American University years prior. And when Dunph got the head coaching job at Temple, he needed a young guy on his staff and presented the opportunity to me. And to be honest with you, I was like, I don't want to go there. I love Charlotte. I love cutting video. I love hanging out at night with these guys. Why would I ever want to leave? And they were like, you don't understand it now, but you will. And I got around Coach Dunphy and loved the guy. I thought he made me a better person. I thought he made me a better teacher. I thought he helped me understand how to interact with people, value relationships, how to manage the other side of campus. I think sometimes coaches, they only understand the gym and the things that come with that, but they don't understand how to get to the other side. When I say that, whether it's the AD's office, the admissions counselor, the different deans of different schools, he understood relationships and people. I thought, he should have had a doctorate in it. And when I went to Temple, there was a kid that we recruited, Ramon Moore, who was a great prospect. Philadelphia player, and at Temple, Philly meant everything. Philly players meant everything to the program. But, the world probably said Ramon wouldn't be successful. And he had some academic struggles. He had a baby his senior year in high school, but he was the public league player of the year. Had trouble getting into school, but got in. And I remember Coach Dunphy said, "This is your project." And I literally looked at him and said, "Oh boy," because, he came from a rough background. And I remember, that first summer, he got his essay assignment and it was too hard and he didn't want to do it. And he missed a practice and he missed a study hall session. And next thing I know, I'm new to Philly, but I'm in South Philly on a beautiful summer day in July looking for Ramon Moore in a neighborhood I knew nothing about. And I think when I showed up at his house, his mom knew I was really serious about mentoring him. He knew I was really serious about him, but we both knew it was going to be really hard. Really, really hard. And I remember the first practice, he couldn't get through it. It was just too demanding of his mind, of his body. And he just quit and literally just picking his kid up all the time, whether it was when he fell down academically, he fell down in life, or he fell down in practice. I can remember babysitting his daughter in my office one day while he had to do something on campus. It was crazy stuff.
Yep.
But I left, I worked at Temple for 3 years. I left after his sophomore year, and we stayed in touch all the time. I check on him, I go see him. I was working at the NBA League office. I was coaching at BU the next year, and I returned to Temple his senior year, and it was like everything came, full circle the way it's supposed to. And he had a great senior year, and I'll never forget graduation day. He gave me a hug and he said, "I couldn't do this without you." And that's why I fell in love with college basketball, because it is the competition, the games, the growing as a coach, the teaching, the defensive, the offensive side of it, growing a program, recruiting guys, love it. But to find a kid that the odds are stacked against him, and for him to become an all-league player and make money professionally, to get his college degree, to be, a good man today in the world, and for him to say you had a piece in his development, I mean, that means more than anything. And I think that's coaching, and I think that's what, especially like young black kids where that's stacked against them, they need people to do those things in their life more than anything. And that's where I fell in love with it. But I fell in love with it because Coach Dunphy instilled in me the understanding of our role as leaders in our community. You got to give back. He always said it like, basketball provides an unbelievable life. You got to give back to the communities that give it to you. You also have to really build these kids up to understand life through basketball. And that's hard to do. I mean, sometimes you're on the court teaching,
right.
Why'd you turn this ball over? Because you were late to class today. But there's a story behind that. Sorry, my son's saying good night.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good.
But I think
that's proving your point right there. Yeah. That's proving your point about you got to be developing your own family, right? You're developing kids as a coach, but you got to develop your own family. So I get it, man. That's
so it's awesome.
That's good stuff.
I mean, that's the reason why I love it and why I got into it and why I've stuck with it. Because for guys like Ramon Moore and for the highs and lows, I mean, we love the highs, but the lows is why you get up and try to figure it out the next day.
When you left the Bobcats and you go and you take that Temple job, did you have what was your level of understanding, would you say, about some of the things that you just talked about in terms of what would be required of you as a director of ops at Temple? Did you have a good understanding of what that job was going to entail, or did you kind of go into it with sort of blind as to what you were going to be in for?
Yeah, I had no clue. I mean, I think I was prepared because I understood how to, organize, develop relationships, communicate. Had a sense of urgency. I mean, those things I had, but, how to pivot between all the things that come with the operations position, whether it was like film exchange, camp, travel, helping with recruiting. At that time, you could go out and recruit, you could go out and recruit 30 miles from the campus. So I was living in Philadelphia. There's a game every night to go to. And that, to be honest, that helped me tremendously prepare me to be a full-time assistant, because when I went into gyms, just because I said, okay, I'm going to wear, what Bruiser Flint wore when he was an assistant coach, wear some slacks, some nice slacks and a shirt. People took me serious. So sometimes people would say, that's the assistant coach at Temple, when in reality, I was just the operations guy. But I could go out on the road. So I met the people and I started to understand how things worked. I mean, that was huge, but I had no clue what I was getting myself into. But in reality, that 3 years when I did ops prepared me to be where I am now, because it accelerated my growth. Because Coach Dunphy let you do everything. I mean, whether it was sitting in a meeting with the AD, he'd ask your opinion. He would walk in the office and be like, okay, 10 seconds left in the shot clock, and, Lavoy Allen and Ryan Brooks are on a ball screen. Should we switch it? And he just look at you. And I'd be like, yeah, switch it. All right, we're going to switch it. And his thing at the time, when he was coaching sometimes, was, it's not about the scheme. It's about how hard you do it. And then once it happens, it's just about your will in terms of the guy who's dribbling the ball versus your will who's defending the ball. Sometimes some of his stuff was a little old school, but I mean, the competitive piece, you weren't going to find a guy that could get you to compete at a higher level than Coach Dunphy could, and to get you to understand how to value the ball. We never turned it over. Thought we had amazing floor spacing. Again, not stuff that you necessarily learn a ton of at the NBA level because it's just a different game in terms of the teaching, the players, the consistency, even the language. But at the same time, I had been exposed to some unbelievable basketball minds. So when you got a chance to take both teachings and experiences together, I became pretty confident in what I was trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about Coach Dunphy, and one of the things that I often think about is when you talk about great coaches, they often do exactly what you described, which is they get their guys to just compete and play harder than other teams. And regardless of whatever the scheme is, if you can get your kids to do that, chances are you're going to have pretty good success. So when you think back to your time with Coach Dunphy, what are some things that he did that maybe a coach who's out there listening can take in terms of how he went about motivating his guys to play hard?
One of the things I can still hear him saying right now is, be the same guy every day. And that's hard, man, for college kids. I mean,
absolutely.
And that was the consistency was what he always talked about. The reliability, he would always, say, hey, if you can't do the right things off the court, I'll never expect you to do the right things on the court. And that's true. I mean, you look at, your high maintenance guys who, are one guy one day and a different guy the next day. But then you're talking about we need to play big. Who knows who you're going to get, right? It's the consistency and all that. And then the other stuff was just, giving yourself up for your teammates. And right, when you think about that, that's just as simple as like the one more pass, right? When the guy's open, that's consistent with just stunting to the basketball. It was simple teachings, but it was in his everyday message. Value and opportunities was huge. And I think, again, he had been doing it so long. I think sometimes guys want to prove they can coach, where, he really helped our guys prepare themselves to compete. And there's a difference. There's a difference in drawing up a beautiful play versus like executing that and understanding, valuing the basketball and valuing the cut and valuing the screen and how all those things are connected. I thought all of our guys, as they grew and they became seniors, they had a PhD in Temple basketball because, we always did kind of the same things, but over time they mastered it, whether it was a dribble handoff, slipping a ball screen, and they did it so hard, and guys really understood how important every possession of a basketball game was, and really teaching that. I think sometimes, again, guys get caught when they teach the game and they show film and you see different things. You got a chance to see a lot in the Zoom era this past summer. Guys want things to be executed a certain way. It's so important. I need this guy here doing this thing. Whereas, sometimes Coach Dunphy was, hey, you know what, it's going to break down, and that's always going to happen. What we can't do is turn over the basketball. We got to take care of the ball. And sometimes those guys that are so value what the play looks like, they're so worried about guys moving and the ball getting through the rim a certain way. You look at them, they're averaging 16, 17 turnovers a game because they haven't taught their guys to really value every single possession. And that was something he talked about every day. When you get to the second half of the season, man, the ball is so important. Taking care of the basketball is something, he just drilled into kids' minds. But, late in the year, second half of the season league play, we're averaging 7 or 8 turnovers a game, and that's huge. Because as we all know, a lot of those games are decided between 2 or 4 points.
Do you want to score more? Training with the Shoticle is the easiest way to score more. The game is changing, and data scientists are determining the best ways to score. Millions of computer simulations determine where to hit the backboard for the highest percentage shots and when it's best to use the backboard. The Shoticle provides those highest percentage shots. From beginners to next-level athletes, the Shoticle is helping players increase their shooting percentages. Visit Shoticle.com now and start scoring more. Have you found in the programs that you've been a part of and the head coaches that you've been able to work for that ability to pick out and emphasize a couple things that become the key to what they want to do out on the floor? Because I think one of the things that you'll see sometimes with maybe inexperienced coaches or coaches who don't have as much success is they try to be the master of everything instead of zeroing down on, hey, we're going to not turn the ball over and we're going to play hard. And if we can do these two things, everything else is going to kind of fall into place from there. Have you seen that in terms of the successful programs and head coaches that you've worked for?
Yeah, I think guys really hone in on just a few things. I mean, like this year at Marquette, when we have 3 standards of excellence, if you will. And it's funny, like I've started to say to myself, well, then that should be everything that we do. You know, when you talk about being selfless, competitive, and tough, we should be recruiting to that. Like if a guy doesn't address those 3 statements, then why are we bringing them to our program? You know, when we build our practice plans, we're building them around those 3 things, and we're trying to have a part that's, you know, a part of practice that's super competitive, a part that's going to challenge our toughness, and then there's always going to be parts of practice where you can point out, you know, things that are not selfless or things that are. And then I think the film probably gels with those when we do our film sessions, because I think Coach Wojciechowski understands you can't inundate guys with stuff, right? Because you go through those marathon film sessions, they're just therapeutic for the head coach. The kids can't process all that. Yep. I mean, they just went through shooting session in the morning, class, weights, you know, might have had a conversation, an argument with their girlfriend. Now they're back in the gym shooting. Now they got practice. Now they got a 30-minute film session. I mean, the brain can only handle so much. So being efficient with it and having quick bursts to get them to, hey, understand what's going on out here on the floor, what we did good, what we did bad, what didn't address our core principles. And then also getting the guys to understand, hey, when I'm talking to one guy, I'm talking to everybody. And then let's move on. Let's be efficient with our time and maximize it so we can get really good work in.
All right. So when we're talking about film work, how much film do you think is an ideal amount for the players to be seeing, let's say, in preparation for a game that you're going to play mid-season? Let's say it's a league game. How much film are you sharing with the players? Obviously, you and the staff are watching a lot of film, but how much are you sharing actually with the kids?
Yeah, I think it's probably like a 10-minute edit that we're showing. Now, it takes longer to go through it. I think that's the challenge. You got to be really efficient with going through it. But we do, you know, what we call the preview. And it's probably, you know, anywhere between 6 to 10 minutes, depending on who we're playing, what, you know, part of the year it is. The presentation of it takes a little bit longer. And then we'll do like a personnel edit, which is probably 3 to 4 minutes. We try to be a little bit faster with that and try to not stop it as much. One of the things I think we do is we try to engage the guys in the film session. So I'll ask questions, get them to do callbacks, because I think otherwise you're just talking to them. And sometimes you're like, all right, I got through my scout, you know, we're good. But they didn't process anything. And then you're screaming at them during the game, like, oh, I went over that on film. But did they retain it is the question. And I think as coaches, sometimes you have to stop and ask yourself, are they receiving the message that you're delivering? Because if they're not receiving it, then that's on you. I mean, sometimes you got to change how you're delivering stuff. I think we get sometimes in this mundane flow where you got to spice it up, you know, a little bit. You know, they're kids, you know, you got to come at them with a little bit something different sometimes, put them on their heels, because otherwise, you know, it's just going to be like, okay, we're checking a box, we're doing film. All right, cool. Okay, we're playing so-and-so. Okay, we're going to, you know, do this on the ball screen. They're going to do this action. Okay, cool. But then they didn't really process it and retain it, where we all know you do the right film session, sometimes that's going to save you a possession or two that could win the game. We also try to break our stuff up with like defense, offense, and culture, where they can process, okay, here's the things I got to do defensively. Here's what I have to do offensively. Here's what I have to do, you know, based off our culture for us to win the game. And I think it helps them conceptualize it and process it a little bit better. Yeah,
I think by going through and asking questions, I think you get more engagement, because I think, as you said, it's really easy to kind of fall into the same patterns of this is how we do things. And I'm sure that's the same with practice. It's the same with film. It's the same with anything, that you have to continuously as a coach sort of reinvent different ways of teaching those same things, whether it's a new drill or just a new way of approaching things. And one of the things that you mentioned just a second ago about trying to be able to recruit to the standards of your program, I want to go back and kind of touch a little bit on that, because I always find it fascinating to just pick people's brains about how they go about recruiting and what they're looking for, and how you dig down into some of those intangible things, because obviously there's clearly a level of talent that you have to even be considered to be recruited by a university like Marquette, but you're looking for guys that are going to be the right fit for your program. So maybe just talk a little bit about how you go about trying to ascertain those intangibles that you mentioned. Like, how do you recruit for toughness? What are things that you're looking for in terms of a player being a selfless player? Are there specific things that you're looking for? Or is it more of an overall feel that you get from being in the gym and just watching a player play multiple times and seeing them on film?
Yeah, I think being in the gym is huge. I don't think you can get that feel for guys without being in the gym, feeling them, hearing them, seeing how they react to things. But, the toughness piece, I just want to see a guy make tough plays, whether it's finishing at the rim, finishing through contact. Some of these kids, they play in amazing high school atmospheres. So, they're on the road, the crowd's going crazy. How do they react to that? They make a big bucket. What do they do? When they're being challenged by guys, how do they react to that? Do they back down? Do they stand up? Do they do it with their play, or do they try to, do it with their voice and shove a guy? I think you got to process that, because I think things become consistent. What they do in high school is probably going to be, a lot of it's going to become their habits. Now we have to figure out what their ceiling is, how you can project their growth, and when you add in training tables and all that stuff. But, what are their character traits about what they do well and what's going to transfer over? We have a kid from Baltimore, Maryland, who high level rebounder. I think that transfers. I think that transfers from high school to college to the pros. I think when you look at his body makeup, he's got a chance to be a monster. So it's our job to help him realize that growth. And he's a tough kid because he comes from a tough environment. We have another kid, Samir Torrance, who played for an Albany City Rocks team who's so well coached. I think all their guys play the right way. He's a leader. And I think he's a winner. And I think when I say that, like, he's the guy that would sprint to the spot and take a charge. He's the guy that came up with the loose ball. He's the guy that was in the middle of the chaos, got the ball, laid it in for a game winner. I think those things translate. And I think sometimes if you pay attention to your staff meetings, you'll get the answers that you need as you develop your rosters in terms of recruiting. I wish we had a guy that did this. We don't do that. We need to work on these things. We don't hit, we don't box out. Okay, we need a guy that rebounds. So if you pay attention to those meetings and you take notes, all of a sudden it's going to tell you, okay, we got to find a guy that sprints the floor harder and rebounds. We got to find a guy that moves the ball well and can run a team. Because in your meetings, you're going to start to talk about what you really, really need or why you're not winning. And I think the other piece to it is, if you ask yourself why you want to win, like, why do we win games? Is it what we do defensively, offensively? Is the pace we play as because we're going to make threes? Well, then that's going to help tell you who the guys are that you need to recruit anyway. So I think sometimes you give yourself the answers if you really, really pay attention.
Yeah, sort of that internal, almost metacognition of thinking within your own program of, hey, what do we need? And then that dictates who you can go out and look at. When you're on the road, how do you strike a balance between what you see in a player when they play with their high school team versus when they play on the AAU circuit? Are you looking for similar things in both environments? Are you looking for something different, or is there one thing that you can pick out better when you watch them playing with their high school versus their AAU team? Just talk about maybe a little bit the difference between watching a game on the AAU circuit versus watching a high school game.
Yeah, I think every kid is so different. I mean, last year, the NCAA allowed us to go watch guys in the summer with their AAU team, and then a couple weeks later you could go, or a couple weeks before, you could go watch them with their high school teams. And a lot of guys, you saw them be two different players. I mean, you go to some of these teams on the EYBL circuit, I mean, they're super teams. They got guys from all over the place who are the man at their high school, and their roles all of a sudden change. And then you go watch them at this high school event, and they're just dominant. So then you got to ask yourself, what does that mean? Is it the competition? Is it the situation? I think a lot of times they're asked to do more with their high schools, so you can see a wider range of their talent, which really helps you evaluate who they are and what they're capable of doing. So I like to see them in both settings. I do think the AAU setting for a lot of the guys that we'll recruit at our level, it's a little bit more competitive. And it's a little bit more challenging, especially on the defensive end, because you're going to get some guys that come at you. Or you're going to play against some, guys that, if we're recruiting a guy that's top 30 in the country, they may be playing against the number 3 player in the country. Well, how do they step up to that challenge? And I think it goes back to your question is, how do you evaluate toughness? Do they want that challenge, or are they going to act like their ankle's hurt, or they're going to back down? Now we got a problem, because in reality, for us to get to a Final Four, we'll probably have to play against that kid one way or another at some point along this kid's career. That's the number 2 player in the country. So I think I want to see him in both settings. And I want to see him, I think the one advantage we do have in the high school setting is you can watch them in practice. So how do they retain information? How do they practice? What are their habits? What's their coaching style like in the high school level? Because you're going to really understand, what they can process, what their learning curves are going to be. I think that stuff's all important, because then you get the full body of work.
What are the conversations like that you have with the people around the player? So whether that's their high school coach, their AAU coach, their parents, just talk a little bit about what those conversations like, and what are some of the things that you look for in those conversations that have led to players being successful. And obviously it's not always the same for every player, but I'm sure there's sort of a through line from the types of answers that you get and the type of kid that you're looking for to what translates to success at the level that you guys are at.
Yeah, I think you want to circle everybody that touches the kid or that he feels like is really important. And it's super important that those people trust you, because if they don't, the minute things don't go right, they're telling that kid it's time for him to go, or they're going to tell him to do things that go against what you're teaching and what you're stressing. So what we try to do here is really invest in those relationships during the high school process, in the recruiting process. They decide to come, then it's, keeping a pulse with the families about, how's he doing? What's he saying? How's he feeling? You got to know the right moments. When he's playing good and he's playing a lot of minutes, you don't have to worry about it as much. But that game where he gets a couple quick fouls or he gets that early sub, you might want to reach out to the family, because you have to reinforce the messages that you're trying to get the kid to receive, because it's a journey and there's going to be highs and lows. But we have to also manage all that together, because when you recruit a kid, you get the uncle, you get the mom, you get the dad, you get the coach, you get the AAU guy. You bring all those guys into your program, maybe not directly, but indirectly through the kid. So we need to make sure that everything that he's hearing and thinking is positive, because if that player doesn't have a free mind, then he's never going to be able to give you what he's capable of giving you. So we try to keep those conversations consistent throughout our program. And we also want to have a consistent message. It's important that we're all on the same page about what's best for the individual. And that sometimes has hard conversations in our conference room as a staff, because if that player or parent calls anyone in our program, we all need to be on the same page about what's best for that individual and how his process of growth is going. Because every day in practice, we have team goals, but we have individual goals, right? Like each one guy's got to get better at ball screen defense, another guy's got to get better at taking care of the basketball. But we all have to understand what all those things are so we can help that kid through his process. Because again, he's going to be engaged with his family. He's going to be on social media. So he's got to be receiving all the right messages from all the people that really matter in his life.
All right. So I got 2 questions related to what you just said. The first one is, I'm going to read between the lines here and assume that there have been players that you've recruited that you feel like had the ability to play at Marquette, and maybe even themselves had the makeup that you were looking for to be able to play, but maybe somebody in their circle is somebody that you felt like, ooh, if we bring this person into our program, they could potentially cause some problems. So has there ever been a situation where you haven't followed through on recruiting a player that maybe you liked because of what you discovered in sort of their inner circle?
Yeah. So when I got the job here, Coach Wojciechowski, the first thing he said was, I want to recruit high-level players, but I want to recruit high-level people. And I think sometimes there's players that just don't fit. And I think one of the things as an assistant coach, when you're recruiting, you have to ask yourself, can that kid play for Coach Wojciechowski, and can Coach Wojciechowski coach that kid? Can they play at Marquette? Absolutely. But can they excel in the program is a different question. Because maybe, we've all recruited guys and they get to your program and you're like, man, this guy's having a little hard time with the coaching. Or, man, our head coach is having a real hard, there's just some things that he just can't get his arms around with this guy. Well, it's our job to figure that out because, again, this is about the kids. I mean, you have to find kids that are going to excel here because you don't want to bring a kid here that, doesn't feel comfortable, never plays up to his potential and transfers. That's not a good thing for you as a recruiter, for the head coach, for the program, or for the young man. So I think a lot of times you're trying to process, okay, how does this all fit? And if you're trying to force it to fit, it's probably not going to work out. So I think you have to constantly be evaluating the person, the player, the circle, and really figure those things out. And sometimes you've got to say to yourself, can you get them? Probably. Is it a good fit? Probably not. So should I probably walk? Yeah. I mean, it's not just about getting guys, it's about getting the right guys.
Absolutely. All right. So to go along with that, even when you bring the right guys into your program, when you have a roster of 12 to 15 players, not everybody's going to get the playing time that they want or think they should get. And so you're going to end up with players who don't get a lot of minutes. So how do you go about, what's the way that you guys as a staff handle those guys who are at the back end of your roster who aren't getting many minutes? How do you keep them engaged? What does that process look like during practice, after games, outside of the practice floor? What are you guys doing to keep those guys engaged in the program so that they're still pulling and doing and fulfilling their role day in and day out to help you guys be successful?
For me, it was a kid that we coached last year. I mean, I think one of the first things, you get on the phone with the mom and dad to make sure they're on the same page that, hey, this is a journey, this is a process. So you need to be helping your son through this process, not telling him, giving him ideas about, where he should go next, or, hey, screw the coaches, they don't know what they're doing. No, we're in this together. We know what we're doing. There's a plan. Let's stick to the plan, because that's going to be the first call. With the individual, I think you spend time with them, getting in the gym, working them out, helping them get better, watch film, help them get better. The walk-ons, the guys who aren't playing as much, get them out there, play 2-on-2, play 3-on-3, let them get reps, let them get better, push him, get him to believe in himself more than he does in the present moment. And then, for me and my family, my wife is tremendous. We'll bring guys over the house. I think that really helps them. They need to feel loved and supported. Sometimes get out of the facility. I think as coaches, we're always in the facility. We're always doing stuff in the facility. Well, I heard, I think it was Shaka Smart say this once. He would meet guys in their dorm rooms, or in the lobby of the dorm, or just outside the dorm. I think that's great because, again, they're going to, sometimes when guys are in an uncomfortable spot, they're going to let down their apprehension when they're at home, and that's their home. So I think that's a really good spot to engage with them. I think all those things are really, really important to help them get through a bump in the road. Because all of our guys, when they hit campus, they're dreaming of playing 30 to 40 minutes a game and the crowd going wild. Well, when it doesn't happen, that's a low feeling, and you can see it. And I think all the guys, they want their teammates to be good and they're having a great time. Then the game ends, and I think the world comes crashing down on them. So now you got to build them back up, and hopefully that opportunity can come. But it's also on them to go out and compete. And I think going back to one of the things you asked about Coach Dunphy is, we got guys to compete at a high level because we competed every day in practice. And we always said, opportunities are up for grabs. And if guys, work their tails off and beat a guy out, that's just, he would say it all the time, that's life. Sometimes that's what happens in life. There's a guy that produces better than another guy. He gets more opportunity. It's just what happens.
Yeah, it's funny how you can boil it down. You can analyze it to this and to that degree, but sometimes it just comes down to who performs better and who's more productive. And that becomes, I think, sometimes crystal clear, and players sometimes don't. You get so trapped in your own head as a player that you don't always recognize that I'm just being outplayed every single day by this guy who's across from me that I'm going up against. And it's amazing how simple the game can be at times, for sure. I wanted to ask you about the new transfer rules and how you think that's going to impact what goes on just in the general college basketball landscape, maybe not specific to Marquette, but just how you think that's going to affect what goes on in college basketball?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. And not that I think the right thing to do is to provide opportunities for kids. I think the NCAA is doing the right thing by doing what's best for the individual. But the reason why I say concerned is it's going to be tough. I mean, end of the year is always the toughest thing. I mean, the last game of the season is always the last game of the season. And there's always some guys that are a little bit emotional. And you saw it this past year with everything with COVID. I mean, a lot of kids weren't on their campuses. So what's the easiest thing to do? Tell a coach that you're going to leave. What's the hardest thing to do? Walk in their office and say, hey, man, I'm going to move on. Now you don't have to sit out. So I think it makes decisions very emotional. I think, again, that process that we just talked about, some guys earning their opportunity is probably lost because sometimes kids are going to come in, screw it, I'm out. I don't want to wait. Or I feel like I was getting jerked around. I'm just going to go. And I don't know if that's necessarily great for the game of basketball, but that's the direction that it's going. And I think we have to really invest in relationships and have a clear vision for kids. I think it would be interesting to see what some programs do. I think some programs may keep shorter rosters to make sure guys get more opportunity, and there's not as much depreciation from the roster. Because the one concern I have is, if you start to get in those situations where you bring in one-time transfers into your program, well, the one thing that can get lost is your culture. I mean, you run out there and say, hey, we're doing Celtic fast break, and everybody starts looking around because they don't know what the hell that is.
Right.
Well, who's going to carry your culture on? And, I've been at places where, sometimes, the culture that was set isn't carried over the right way, and all of a sudden you start taking a turn in the wrong direction, or it's harder to get through the day because you got to keep building the culture and reinforce it over and over. Whereas the best places I've worked is the culture is just passed down from one group on to the next. And that's one of the concerns. And then I think, for some programs it works, but for a lot of places, the best part about college basketball is watching guys grow up. You fall in love with a guy because you watch him as a freshman, a sophomore, junior, and senior. And I hate to see that, go away. Because I think that's one of the beautiful parts about college basketball is watching the maturation process for those guys. So it's going to be interesting, but like everything, there's opportunity. I mean, there's a need, for a player for our program. We'll be recruiting those guys because I think that's a new opportunity. I mean, you saw what the fifth year grad transfer thing did. I mean, that was a unique rule change, and teams have maximized from it. And there's been some guys that have had high level success doing it. And at the end of the day, it's about the kids. So that's what the student athletes feel like is the best thing for them. I don't know that I can argue that, because in the end of the day, we do all this for the student athlete.
I think that's something that last statement that you just made is one that when you talk to, and we've been so fortunate to be able to talk to so many good people on the podcast, it's like that particular statement that you just made about it being for the kids and that being why you're there. And that's kind of been a theme that you've hit on multiple times tonight. But I think it's so important to go back and revisit that and just keep thinking about it, that all the things that we do, whether it's the X's and O's piece, whether it's the relationship piece, all of it, you ultimately, if you do it with the best interest of the kids in mind, I think that's going to lead you to be able to have the kind of success that you want to have as a coach. And I think you can measure success in a lot of different ways. Obviously, at the college level, there's pressure to win, and you get measured by your won-loss record probably ultimately. But I think from what I hear you saying and from what we've talked to a bunch of coaches and my own experience, I think one of the ways that you judge success is, you talked about Ramon Moore, and a guy who you had success with him, not because you turned him into a great player, not because he had success necessarily in the game, but you turned a kid's life around who knows where he would have been had you not been able to have that kind of impact on him. And I think that's something that, again, is invaluable. And you think about that call 10 years after you coach somebody and they call you up and say, hey, coach, I just got married, or I want to invite you to my wedding, or, I had a kid, or I got a new job. Like, those are the things that I think really are special to guys who really love what they do in the coaching profession. So to kind of go along with that point, I want to just talk to you a little bit about your preparation kind of going through your career. I'm assuming that at some point if an opportunity presented itself for you to be a head coach, that you'd like to someday run your own program. So what are you doing? What have you done over the course of your career to start to collect and crystallize what you would want your program and your culture to look like were you to eventually ever get an opportunity to be a head coach?
So I spent a lot of time on that this past year. And I think the first step is understanding who you are. It's not going to be advantageous for me to try to be Steve Wojciechowski or Bruiser Flynn or Fran Dunphy or Pat Chambers. I'm my own person. But what does that really mean? What do I do really well? What are some things that are not my strengths? Knowing your weaknesses are really, really important, I think, as a coach, because I think guys that are really smart, they find guys who in reality can do the things they don't do well. They do them at a high level, because you can't fake it, right? You can't go into your office, close the door and watch a DVD and come out and say, hey, I know how to teach matchups on.
Right,
you don't.
Right.
You don't have the feel. You can't redo what that guy did on TV. But if I sit there and I say, okay, here's the 3 areas that I know I need help with, I need to find a guy that's mastered those things. That's really, really important. So if I can have an honest conversation with myself, that's great. And I think that was one of the first steps for me to say, okay, here's a few things that I know that I'm going to need some help with in this area. And let me start to think about some guys, if I'm ever blessed with a head coaching opportunity, that could help me in that area. But then also, here's some areas that I feel really, really strong at, right? So these are the parts of the program that I know are going to be a huge part of the things that I'm going to emphasize every day. And I've said a few of them, relationships and trust are going to be huge, because that's how we're going to build our program. That's how you're going to build the community. And again, I think a lot of the things that I've seen through my life, and I think all of us are products of our environment or our experiences. Well, what I saw John Calipari, do at UMass, again, it's throwing yourself into a community. Why? Because that community's got to embrace your program. When you think about getting internships for your players, bringing fans to the program, trying to get businesses to buy sponsorships, you need that community to support you. So you have to support that community. You got to be a part of the community. You got to be seen in the community. That's huge. When you talk about the things on the floor, I know how I want to play and how I want my team to win. So as you start to figure those things out, that's how you're going to build your culture. And I think going back to what I said we do here every day is we're going to evaluate those things. We're going to practice those things every day. We're going to push ourselves on those things every day. We're also going to recruit those things every day. And I think those are the things that are really important to me. But I think the first area, especially as a first-time head coach, and I know you talked to Stan Johnson, and he and I have talked about his journey a ton. It's being honest with yourself about, okay, where am I at right now as a leader and a coach, and where are my blind spots, and let's address those right away, because those aren't going away. And I don't think if you don't address those early in your career, especially as a head coach, they're going to come back to haunt you real fast.
Yeah, I think what you said about kind of filling in areas that you're weak with people that you have experience with, people that you've known, people that you've worked with, and you understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and you understand your own, and then you can start to build this staff where everybody picks up in areas where they're strong that maybe somebody else isn't, or maybe somebody else doesn't want to spend as much time in a particular area and somebody else loves that area. Then you start to build the kind of staff that you can have a tremendous amount of success with, for sure. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So as you look forward in your career, and let's just focus on what you're doing now, what do you see as being the biggest challenge that you have ahead of you outside of the challenge that we're all facing with the COVID and the pandemic and trying to figure out whether we're going to get back on the floor? But let's just for a moment imagine that it's a normal situation. What's the biggest challenge that you see going forward? And then what's your biggest joy when you get out of the bed in the morning and you're going to go into the office at Marquette University as an assistant men's basketball coach? What's the biggest joy that you get out of your job every single day?
And when you say biggest challenge, you mean here at Marquette?
Yeah, I would say here at Marquette. Let's focus there. Yeah. And then maybe you can even throw it, we take it one step further. So after you answer that, then what do you see as the biggest challenge long term? Let's say over the next 20 years, getting an opportunity to maybe run your own program at some point.
I think the biggest challenge at Marquette is there's an amazing, tradition here at the program. There's an amazing desire to support the program. I think one of the things why our kids have fallen in love with this place is the people. The people here support this program and push it and support our kids and resource it at a high level. Well, COVID has put the people away. I mean, you don't see them. You don't see the people in the buildings. And when I say the people, not just the fans, I mean the people that work on campus and are on the ground with us. So how do you make our kids feel supported every day? What are the little things that we can do? One of the unique things that everybody fell in love with is the fan support and the families coming into our place and seeing themselves there. We talk about being a Marquette mom all the time. Well, being a Marquette mom is going to be a little bit different on Zoom, or watching the games on your laptop or your TV. So how do we support the families? Because what they fell in love with is not going to be the reality this year. That's a huge challenge because, again, the support through this journey, through the highs and lows, is just as much as important as how we prepare for games. So how are we going to do that? We had a meeting today about that stuff, and I think that's huge to our guys' success. And then for me as a leader, and having my own program, I would say the biggest thing is, you think about. You said 20 years. When I thought about that, I was like, wow, it's a long time from now.
That's for sure.
But the game is going to change so much, and I think if you went and talked to John Thompson or John Chaney and the things that they did as coaches, back then would not work right now, especially in terms of, how you led your program and the things that kind of people did offensively and defensively might not work now. So what's going to be the next thing 20 years from now, I think, is the next challenge. And how do you grow through that? Like, I can remember when DVDs kind of went out the window and people started downloading games, it got harder for coaches, because downloading games and editing themselves is just so foreign. So what's going to be the next thing, and how do you keep up with that? Because I could just talking to Kyle Neptune, who was an assistant at Villanova the other day. I remember we were the young guys out there, and now people are calling us for advice. So
yep.
Those guys that are coming up, they're going to be able to do some things a little bit faster than we can. So what does that mean? And where does that place us in the business? And kind of what's the next wave and what's going to be the next change, and how do you stay ahead of it? I think people have taken advantage of the Zoom moment, and they've shared the game and grown a ton through it. But how do we keep that consistent too? Because I think as assistant coaches especially, it's hard to really improve for yourself because you're always doing recruiting and worrying about your players and helping your head coach. But how do you navigate and research and get better at things that you find personally interesting to you? Zoom creates that opportunity, but how do you keep that going when you go back to work and you're back in the office and there's new expectations of your time? So I think those would be the things, I think about. In terms of the joy when I get to work, it's the kids. It's just so fun if you go in, you bring a guy in your office and you watch film with them or you talk to them, and then they go out having success with the things you talk to them about. That's awesome. Watching a kid grow is awesome. Helping a kid through a hard spot is awesome too. I think just being around them and the challenges of their day to day and helping them through it is great. They also keep you young. I mean, you go in the gym and they got a 21 Savage playing, and I've never heard that. And again, I'm starting to feel old because of that. But they keep you going. They keep you on your toes. They keep you engaged. They're telling me what shoes and what suits to buy and all that. I mean, it's just a lot of fun. And for me, in my years in this business, it's never felt like work because you work around kids, you work around basketball, you work with good people. It's awesome. So I love that. And then, the other part that I love too is that, my personal family loves where we are. I think as coaches, that's really, really important. They love Milwaukee, they love the community, they love Marquette. If they didn't, then I wouldn't be a great husband, a great father, or a great coach, because my attention would be all over the place because you're trying to fulfill all their needs, but they feel super fulfilled here. So that makes me feel really good every morning also.
Yeah, that's a great point, that I think it's one of the things that we've talked to many coaches about is being able to make sure that your family feels engaged and a part of what it is that you do every day. Because we all know the amount of time demands that you have as a basketball coach are huge. And so you got to have a supportive wife on board, and you got to have your family feeling like they're a part of what you do. Otherwise, it gets really, really difficult, like you said, to do a good job on any front as a dad, as a husband, as a coach. It gets to be really a challenge if you don't bring those people along. Before we wrap up here, Dwayne, I want to give you an opportunity to share how people can get in contact with you, how they can find out more about the basketball program at Marquette. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, for the program, obviously we have an unbelievable social media platform, that our people on campus manage and keep going, which has been really, really impressive here. So you can kind of follow our journey. My Twitter account is Coach Killings DK. So it's at Coach Killings DK. You can follow me on there. I'm not as good as some other guys, but I try to post some stuff as we're going through the days. And to be honest with you, I'll be completely direct. Like, I'd love to help anybody that wants to be helped. So I'll just throw out my personal phone number. No worries there. If I get some spam phone calls, I'll be okay. But that's 704-577-5198. Again, that's 704-577-5198. And I'll just, leave with, again, like, I've worked for some great people, and all of them have really stressed the importance of giving back and helping the next group of guys. So I just say, anybody listening, I don't have it all figured out, but if there's something I can help with, I'm glad to do it, because I owe it to the people that have helped me. I owe it to the game of basketball, because it's afforded me an unbelievable life. I've had an unbelievable ride, with it. My family enjoys a great life because of it. So if I can help the next guy find their opportunity and find their next fit, I'd love to do it.
Dwayne, that's great stuff. Thank you so much for being willing to take some time out of your schedule to jump on with us, share with us, and share with our audience the experiences that you've been able to have throughout your career, and for being willing to help. And it's one of the things that I think all of us in the basketball community have a pretty good understanding of how willing people are to share and to be able to lift up the people that are coming up behind them. And so for you to share your number and just share how people can get in touch with you, we can't thank you enough for doing that for us and for our audience. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. If you have an existing podcast or are looking to launch your own pod but aren't sure where to start, the team at My Podcast Manager can help. Our podcast team works behind the scenes so you can do what you do best. We'll help you launch your podcast, make it sound great, and free up your time for the more enjoyable parts of podcasting. If you're ready to put your podcast editing, production, and promotion on autopilot with a trusted team of podcasting professionals, visit mypodcastmanager.com to get started.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.